Coming up on this week's show, we have author Marshall Thornton and voice artist Joel Leslie, and they're here to talk about their collaboration on the audiobook of Femme.
Welcome to the Big Gay Fiction Podcast, the show for readers and writers of gay romance fiction. If you can read it, write it, watch it, or listen to it, these two guys are going to talk about it. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Adams and Will Knaus.
Welcome to episode 104 of Jeff and Will's Big Gay Fiction Podcast. I'm Jeff from JeffAdamsWrites.com.
And I'm Will from WillKnaus.com. This week's episode is brought to you in part by listeners just like you. We'll have more information on how you can become a supporter of this podcast in just a few moments. Welcome back to another episode.
Happy October.
Yes, it's already October.
How did that happen?
I don't know. We've been a bit busy. We've been traveling and doing stuff.
Yes, we have.
And so before you catch us up on your writing, I'm going to let everyone know that you have been busy on your series. Like crazy busy. Not only is the first book of the Wingers series just about to come out.
Yeah, October 17th.
You've been busy working on blog posts and some marketing for that first book. You have been working hard on the edits for the second book in the series. You've pretty much wrapped those up.
Those are pretty much done. I wrapped those up this week. We're just down to galleys now.
Okay. And you've also managed to squeeze in a little bit of time on the third book. You've gotten back to writing on that one as well.
I have. It's crazy.
I can't even comprehend how you keep any of that straight in your head.
It could be hard at times. It was harder when I was editing book 1 and writing book 2. Mm-hmm. 2 and 3 have been a little easier to keep separate in my head, but yeah, it's a little crazy.
Yeah. So, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That is a monumental task. You are handling it like a pro. So,
I know it looks that way to the outside world.
I think you're doing a very good job.
Thank you.
We also handed in what is essentially the final edits on our co-written book, The Hockey Player's Heart. When we have some release information on that particular tome, we'll let you know.
And somewhere in there, we'll get to do a cover reveal, too.
We will indeed, yes. Coming up soon. Soon to an episode near you. We, last week, went on a little trip.
Yes, we did. We went down to Sacramento. As we hinted on in one of the 2 podcasts we recorded before we left.
Last week.
We are looking at moving from our roost up near Eureka, California. And Sacramento has been top of that list. And I think Sacramento is the entire list now.
Pretty much. I feel pretty good about that. We essentially just went down to explore and check out this local scene.
Yeah, and I liked what we saw.
I did too.
We got to hang out with fellow author Scott Coatsworth and his husband Mark. Yeah. And we know there are several other authors in our genre that live in that area. They have a lovely LGBT library down there, the Lavender Library, which we got to hang out at. And this one bought a few books from their collection that they are selling off parts of. So, yeah, that'll be dangerous for us to live near. But, yeah, I think Sacramento in early 2018 looks like the podcast and us will pick up and move.
And yes, it will.
Woohoo! Coming up this week on October 4th, which is NHL opening day. Yay, hockey's back. Changing on the Fly, the second period comes out. So that's exciting. This collection of gay romance features authors including Heather Lire, V.L. Locey, and RJ Scott, and myself. Proceeds from the sale of this anthology are all going to the You Can Play Project, which is an organization that is dedicated to ensuring equality, respect, and safety for all athletes without regard to sexual orientation and or gender identity. So very excited to be a part of that anthology. It is available across all of your favorite ebook buying platforms, and we'll have a link in the show notes to it. And I'm happy to say that Heather, VL, and RJ will be here on the show in episode 107 on October 23rd.
That is awesome.
Yeah, very happy to be giving more to the You Can Play Project. I've been giving $1 from each copy sold from Hat Trick since it came out in 2013, and so I'm glad to be giving them a little more donation along the way.
Cool.
Yeah.
In other news, this past September was it International Podcast Month?
It was International Podcast Day on the 30th.
The day, okay. It was International Podcast Day on September 30th. I hope you all celebrated by listening to your favorite podcast. Also, on the 30th, they handed out the 12th Annual People's Choice Podcast Awards, of which we were nominated.
Yes, we were nominated in the LGBTQ category, alongside, I believe it was 9 other podcasts. And we send our big congratulations to the Derek and Romaine show, who won in the category. They've been around for a long time. As a podcast. Before they were a podcast, they were a radio show on Sirius. And we congratulate them. I'll be honest, when I saw them in the lineup, I was pretty sure they'd get it.
It's like they got it locked in.
Because they've done this for a long time.
Exactly.
And I've known Romaine for a while. We met during one of the Suckle for the Cause rides. She's an awesome, awesome lady, and I couldn't be happier for these two.
Yes, congratulations to the two of them. Really quickly, let's mention a podcast we recently discovered called Talk of the Toon. This show, every episode, explores an episode of He-Man.
That classic 1980s animated series.
Okay, it's two Scottish guys hanging out, talking about episodes of He-Man. It is absolutely hilarious. They really do a really funny deep dive into each episode, proving how cuckoo bananas the series really was. So if you think Scottish accents are sexy, and you like comedy, and if you happen to be into Masters of the Universe, we highly recommend checking out Talk of the Toon.
Absolutely. I don't even know that I would care what they're talking about, because the accents are really awesome.
We love them to pieces. Check out that show. We highly recommend it.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes for folks.
Also, we want to mention that September 2017, as a matter of fact,
yes,
was our most highly listened to month ever.
Yeah.
Is that is
that
there
is true.
A name for the metric? What is it? The most downloaded episodes? Okay.
This is specifically around our podcast downloads and not our YouTube views, because we've had a few episodes that have gone cuckoo bananas on YouTube.
Yeah.
But this is specifically around our podcast downloads. We exceeded for the month, so we had a lot of people. From as much as I could tell, looking at the numbers, we had people who maybe took the summer off and came back and picked up some episodes that they might have missed. We also seem to have had some new people, so welcome if you're new to the show. Glad to have you here, because we had a lot of people downloading a lot of stuff out of our backlist. Plus, we had our highest downloaded week ever on September 18th, which was the week that Suze was here last. So her episode certainly played into that, and we suspect we got some of you into our listening group from that episode. So welcome to the new folks. Thank you for continuing to help our podcast to grow.
Yes. So whether you are a listener who has joined us since the very beginning in episode 1, or whether you have just discovered us, we're very grateful to have you here, and we hope you continue to join us each and every week talking about the subjects we love.
Gay romance and all that pop culture goodness.
All that good stuff. Now, if you enjoy this show, you can, of course, join us on Patreon. For as little as 25 cents an episode, your pledge on Patreon can help support the this podcast and help us pay for some of the back-end production costs. Now, for those fans who pledge at the silver and gold levels, you'll have the exclusive opportunity to ask questions of some of our upcoming guests. All patrons have the option to have a personalized thank you sent directly to you.
From good old snail mail.
Yep, exactly. Also, every month, we will produce a special bonus video where we talk about stuff that we've been up to. We also answer any pertinent questions our Patreon pledge people may be curious about.
Look at you extending that alliteration moment.
I don't know where I just pulled that out of. Anyway, if you're curious about what it's like to be a supporter of the Big Gay Fiction Podcast, just join us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/BGFP. Big Gay Fiction Podcast.
So I'm excited to welcome Christina from Christina's Bookshelf back to the podcast. Hello.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as always.
So recently, the last week of September, you ran a week devoted to debut authors, which is so cool because sometimes for the debut authors, it's so hard to pick up and get noticed in the first place, right? Because you're brand new and it's like, you're that, do I want to give somebody my book? Should I give them my book? Will they take my book? And now you're doing a whole week for it. So kind of what was your inspiration for that before we kind of dive into some of the books?
It just seemed like there were a lot that came out at once. It seemed like one right after another, there was debut author. And I was like, I've been friends with a lot of these people, and I didn't even know some of them were writing books because that's how much I pay attention to the world around me. And so I was like, I want to read and review. And I've thought, I'm going to do a debut author every week. And then I was like, why don't I just do a whole week dedicated to debut authors? And so that's what I decided to do, is just kind of celebrate their dreams coming true, I guess.
How did you pick the books that you went after, or did you just put out a call to all debut authors, give me your books?
I didn't even put out a call. Like, I bought 2 of them, and 2 of them were given to me after I had just made like a thing of, wow, there's a lot of debut authors. Then a couple of them were like, well, I'm a debut author. And I was like, yes. And so that's how I got the other 2. But I mean, people were like, hey, I wrote a book. And I was like, holy crap.
So who made the cut? What do we have to look at in terms of these books?
We have Letting Go, Love by Design #1 by Morningstar Ashley. And it looks like this is going to be May-December, which is one of my favorite tropes. And it looks like we're going to be dealing with some mental health issues, which I like because it seems that pretty much everybody in the world has something, and I hate when it's like brushed under the rug. And one of the main characters is the guardian of his younger sister, so I kind of like that there's like the kid aspect, and he has to be like responsible for somebody else other than himself. So it's going to be watching him cope not only with his anxiety, but with her as well. So I think it's going to be really good. And then #2 is Looking In by Michael Bailey. Like, I didn't even know he was writing a book. And then he's like, I have this book coming out. And I was like, oh, I'm a horrible friend. And it looks like we have one main character who has, after his mom died, was physically and emotionally abused. And it breaks my heart because I hate to think of why he would have been abused,
especially at that time.
Right. Like,
I mean, it's bad enough to get at any time, but coming right off of the death of a parent. Right,
and that might have been the only source of comfort that he had, and now it's gone. And so he feels, like he's unlovable, untouchable. Nobody's going to want him because he's been, abused, and he's not completely lovable to himself. And then the other character is a Marine, very protective. And I think this book is going to be probably like the most emotional out of all of them. And I'm kind of looking forward to hopefully having that little cry session with it. And then book #3 is Coffee and Bourbon by Jasper Gray. And this has a transgender main character. So that was really, we just don't see enough of those. Mm-hmm. And so I'm looking forward to reading it. The main character, who's transgender, owns a coffee house and kind of falls for the bad boy that just moved into town. And I think this one's going to be fun. I think there's going to be some sadness because he's lost his family along his transition, but I think it's going to be fun. And then the last one is Damage Control by Lynne Van Dorn. And we have a Hollywood star, an up-and-coming Hollywood star, who's a side, what's the word I'm looking for? He's hit with a scandal. Like, somebody wants to take him down a peg or two, and so he can't become this big Hollywood person. So he goes back home, and somebody that he's known all his life. His publicist says, you know, it might be good if you have a boyfriend in the view of this scandal. And so, you know, we have the whole fake boyfriends trope that's going on here. And I think it's going to be hilarious. And so he's like, okay, you know, let's be fake boyfriends. And of course, you know, it's always going to lead to something more. And I was told by the person that gave me the book that there's some sensitive topics of rape and self-harm, but they're mentions. It's not like an in-depth going forward. That the book is not supposed to be dark or angsty. So I think it's just going to be a quick memory or a lapse, and then we get to the good stuff. So I'm looking forward to all of them. I think they're all going to have their own emotions. I think they're all going to have their own highs and lows, and they're each going to be just an individual ray into the person that I've been following on Facebook for a while.
And I love that they're each so diverse. They don't, you know, they're not the same tropes. They're not the same character types. They're not.
Right. Yeah, that's I'm looking forward to as well, is that each one has its own, it looks like each one has its own little message, theme, lesson that you're going to get out of it. And that's what's going to be really exciting, is deciphering the lesson. And every book, they say nobody reads the same book. And when I do my reviews, I try to say, this is the lesson that I got out of it. And I think that it's kind of fun because other people will tell me the lessons they got out of it. And then we can, you know, converse and say, how did you get to where you were? Because that's not even anything I thought about. And so it's going to be interesting to see what lesson that I pull out of this. And then I can talk to other people and see kind of where they went with it too, especially with a debut author. Like, what are you bringing to the table for me to look at that somebody else hasn't already done? So I'm excited to tell you guys all about it.
I look forward to seeing these reviews. So what we'll do for the people listening is that since this podcast is coming out after the week of reviews, we'll link up to the individual books so people can buy them, but also to each of your reviews so that people can tune in and find out what you thought of each of these books.
I think each of these books is going to be fantastic.
I hope so. I mean, that's always the wish when you pick up a book, right?
Yes. Hype it all up, and then I come back and I'm like, it was all right.
So, Christina, I'm so glad you shared these with us. We look very forward to seeing you in Denver in just a few weeks.
Yes.
In Somewhere on Mackinac by Jeff Adams, Jordan Monroe travels to Mackinac Island for the Somewhere in Time fan celebration weekend. Once there, he becomes attracted to local stable owner Miles Coulter. When Jordan learns the stable's in trouble, he wants to help despite Miles' resistance. As their relationship grows, he dreads the issues that face them. Can they forge a love as timeless as the romance in their favorite film? Find out in Somewhere on Mackinac by Jeff Adams. Available from DreamSpinnerPress.com, Amazon.com, and other ebook retailers. So during our weekend in Sacramento, we actually picked up and went to LA for less than 24 hours. Which is the first time I think we've ever done something like that. We went down specifically to see the production of Matthew Bourne's The Red Shoes, which has been playing its U.S. premiere at the Almonson Theater. Mm-hmm. This was gorgeous. I loved everything about it. Now, I've been a big Matthew Bourne fan since he did the all-male Swan Lake, which is well over a decade ago now. Mm-hmm. And this new production of The Red Shoes was amazing.
Mm-hmm. Really wonderful. It's, of course, based on the classic British film. It's the story of a dancer, Victoria Page, and she's sort of working her way up through the ranks of a dance company. And she falls in love with a modest composer. He also works with the dance company. But the guy who runs the dance company also has his eye on Victoria. And that sort of sets up the romantic love triangle that's the basis for most of the drama in The Red Shoes. The Red Shoes also refers to the classic Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale. In the movie, as well as this new dance production, there is a show within a show, and Victoria is sort of pulled from the chorus and gets to dance the lead in the brand new ballet of The Red Shoes. Now, comparing this new stage production to the classic film is a little bit like comparing apples and oranges. While, I mean, of course it's the same source material, I think film has its own the film has its own special quality that you can't necessarily recreate on stage. Matthew Bourne has presented his own wonderfully unique vision of this specific source material. He's used the music of Bernard Herrmann, the classic film composer. He's sort of taken different themes from different film scores and sort of melded them all together into a really beautiful symphonic piece, first and foremost. That paired with the remarkable choreography from Matthew Bourne himself, plus the wonderful dancers and actors who portrayed the different roles that Matthew works with. It was all really, really wonderful. The only criticism I might have of the stage production is that since we're talking about music and dance, there's no actual dialogue in the stage show. And I think the end, well, which involves a train, literally kind of comes out of left field, and you're kind of left scratching your head. The film, using dialogue and everything else that it has going for it, you kind of you better understand Victoria's her
motivations,
her frame of mind,
okay,
and why the film ends the way it does. Victoria has to choose between becoming a composer's wife or being an artist and continuing to dance with the ballet company. She can't have both. And that is basically the crux of the drama and why the movie ends the way that it does. So I think, yeah, that was my only criticism. I think the end is a little abrupt and a teensy bit confusing.
It is,
but
I have not seen the film. I'm like, oh, she decided she needed to run in front of a train. Okay.
So we highly recommend you check out The Red Shoes, both the movie and the stage production, if it happens to come to your neck of the woods.
Yeah, speaking of neck of the woods, it wrapped up in LA on October 1st, and it does have stops through October and just a titch into November. It'll be at the Kennedy Center in D.C., as well as stops in Charlotte, North Carolina, and in New York.
Want to hang out with us between shows? Check us out on Facebook. You never know what we might post. News about book sales, bonus video content, and maybe even a live broadcast or two. Like us today at facebook.com/biggayfictionpodcast and see what we get up to next.
So recently I had the great pleasure to talk to Marshall Thornton and Joel Leslie about the book Femme. Now, as you'll hear in the interview, it was Joel who brought the book to my attention because he messaged me and was like, "You really need to read this book. It's really important. It's really awesome." Because he believed that much in the material that he did for the voiceover for the audiobook. And he was right. The book blew me away on its themes and what it talks about, and it's a little different from some of the romances that I've tended to read. These guys are great interviews, so I think you'll really enjoy listening to Marshall and Joel talk about this. I'm thrilled to welcome to the podcast Marshall Thornton and Joel Leslie. Marshall is the author of the popular Boys Town series. He has been a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award 5 times and won once. His romantic comedy Femme was a 2016 Lambda finalist for Best Gay Romance. Joel is an audiobook narrator with over 115 titles to his credit. He's the winner of 2 Audiophile Earphone Awards and was named Best Narrator of the Year 2016 by Sinfully MM Book Reviews. He loves that every day he gets to share these beautiful, inspirational, and empowering GLBT characters with the world. Welcome, Marshall and Joel.
Hello, sir. Thank you for having us.
Oh, my pleasure. Glad to have you back, Joel.
Yay!
And, you're actually the reason we're here talking about Femme, which is kind of the focus of what we're doing today. So when Femme came out in audio this past June, you actually contacted me saying it was like a really honest-to-goodness LGBT romance, and it's a fun treatment of a really important topic, the anti-femme stigma among gay men. Now, I loved the book. Of course, Joel, when you recommended it, I had to go just gobble it up. And it was everything you said it was. And it does touch on, I think it actually does more than the anti-femme stigma, to be honest. And Marshall, tell us where the inspiration for this came from.
I guess I'm kind of a internet junkie, and I read a lot of news on the internet, and I follow a lot of gay magazine stuff, and I was seeing a lot of commentary about this subject and about the way that people behave on Grindr and places like that, how they talk about no fats or femmes, and it just occurred to me that I would make a really interesting kind of romantic comedy about opposites attracting. I guess that was about 2014, and I wrote the first chapter, and I didn't do anything with it for about a year and a half, and kept seeing that same subject coming up. And so every time I would see the subject, I was going, yeah, that actually will make a really good book. And then in the spring of 2016, I did it. 16, yeah. Last year. I wrote the book in about 3 months. So.
And it's not only the stigma, as you call it, between Dog and Lionel, and them trying to form this romantic relationship. I mean, it goes to the patrons in the bar, and the manager of the baseball team, and how Lionel reacts when he gets his other job. And why do you think it is that this isn't really pulled more into traditional romance and even gay fiction in some ways?
Gosh. One of the things that I've learned since I wrote the book is that there are actually a lot of M/M books that cover this relationship. They refer to it as an alpha-beta relationship. And so it's interesting to see people's reactions, because some people are like, wow, this is really interesting. And then other romance readers are like, oh yeah, I've read about 5 of these. And I had no idea, it's because I have read romance books, but I'm not a big romance reader. So it was new to me. And I think it's relatively new in gay fiction. I don't know of a lot of other books like it that you'd call gay fiction. So. Okay.
And that makes a lot of sense. And we should tell people too, for those who don't know, you tend to operate more in the mystery thriller kind of rom-com genre.
Yeah, I go back and forth between mysteries and romantic comedies. I don't really write romance, and I've done that for decades. I was doing that when I was a film student. I would write a thriller script, and then I would write a romance script or a romantic comedy script, because I like both genres. I like writing comedy, and I like writing mysteries. So I've actually just kind of kept that up.
And there's aspects, I think, of Femme that touch on romantic comedy.
Oh, absolutely.
But it does feel more like a traditional romance. And how did you end up going more that route than kind of the comedy side of it? Or was it because of the subject matter?
Gosh, my understanding of romance is that you have to have both points of view. And most writers will mix that up, whereas I used a very strict back and forth between the characters, and I'm also in first person, which is not traditional romance. And that structure is one that I've used a couple times, and it's the same structure that is used for About a Boy by Nick Hornsby, which I would not call a romance. So it's always been my way of dealing with that audience, who wants to hear about both characters, but that's as close as I got.
So let's have Joel talk for a while. over here, because the guy who makes his living talking hasn't gotten to talk much yet. So you initially told me with the other stuff that you gave me that you called this an important romance, because here was a romantic lead who's not the alpha male. You've recorded a hundred books now. I take it you don't come across this type very often.
What? I don't think you come across often a character who has the alpha beta thing that Marshall was talking about. I mean, that comes up a lot when you're narrating like shifter fiction and stuff like that, when it's very, but what you don't end up with is an effeminate character who is a dominant personality, who is comfortable in their own skin and really kind of functions as a hero in the book. And that's amazing. I mean, I think what was I love doing the male-male romance that I do. But it is a different animal. And very often in male-male romance, you're ending up with the personalities of basically two alpha males that just happen to kind of come together. And everyone is very often versatile, and that's kind of, it's a different sort of thing. But this really spoke to me as something very true. And the character they just jumped off the page, and they just kind of like grabbed me, and it felt like something I didn't get to do very much of. I don't, I wish there was a lot more LGBT, like actual LGBT fiction versus male-male romance that was out there in audio. And it doesn't come across my, desk very much. And what I loved about this is a true LGBT novel by an amazing gay writer. And it is incredibly moving, and it's very romantic, and it's very funny. And it's a romance, but there's not like sex every page. It's not, it's not an erotic romance. It's sexy, but it's not like, there's 3 sex scenes spread throughout the book and you can sort of anticipate, it was very exciting and very different. And I felt like it was it had a really interesting message, and one that I've seen people in my life that I care about and friends deal with. I have, one of the people that I thought of immediately is I have a friend who's this 6'5" guy who actually works at Animal Kingdom at Disney, and he wears like makeup to work every day and has like incredibly fierce eyebrows, and like he's not in drag at all. Like it's very gender fluid, but and he's a top, and it's very interesting that he has people make fun of him all the time on Grindr. Like, I don't believe that that's what you are. Like, and having a friendship with him made me really go, wow, I get who this is. It hit a personal place for me just because of this friendship. So it was very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And it's not, to me, like when you told me about this book, what kind of flipped it on its head for me is that while Lionel is Femme, he is, Don't give it away.
But yes, he is.
Well, you kind of alluded to it a little bit, so I don't think I spoiled that.
No, that's true. Marshall may want us to cut that out, but no, that is also really cool. Like, there's so many. It's those people don't get represented in fiction.
Yeah,
and a lot of that because of a lot of that in the male-male romance community, which is mostly what we do, is probably because that's not as strong of an appeal to female readers, which I totally understand. I mean, because that's a huge part of that market. So this was a very different book, and it's really touched people. Like, it really has surprised, and I've had people have really strong reactions to it, which is so exciting. I mean, it's beautifully written, so of course they do. But
and let's talk a little bit. Oh, go ahead, Marshall.
I would describe the book as being analogous a little bit to chick lit, more like the relationship between chick lit and romance is kind of what's going on here, and so those two genres have huge crossovers. And I think that a lot of M/M readers would really like the book, and it is different in the sense that it's follows a different path and is much more in the romantic comedy zone and the chick lit zone than a strict romance. And I think that really has to do with the character growth is much more about personal realization. This is the way I describe it. For me, the difference between a romantic comedy and a romance is that in a romance, love conquers all. And in a romantic comedy, love is the trophy, love is the reward for learning a lesson. So, I mean, it's a slight difference, but
that's really cool. Well, and I've had people have very strong reactions to these characters. Marshall and I have talked about this, and I had some, one reviewer in particular who's a very smart, very good, very prolific reviewer of LGBT fiction. She had like this huge response to Dog, and just thought he was basically a douche.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he does douchey things. I mean, the really interesting thing for me with that is that it never crossed my mind that people would say those things about him. When I wrote the book, and in looking at those comments, which I see every so often, I wonder sometimes if it isn't what their experience of being in the closet is and how closely they can relate to it. Because for me, it was just automatic that, people do incredibly douchey things when they're struggling to get out of the closet.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. It was the same thing with me. It was just kind of more like, smack your head, ugh. Like, you felt bad for him. I felt bad for him because it's just sort of so wild, that kind of curb your enthusiasm, like, oh God, I see it coming, kind of, rather than, but I do think I think you read this book in a very different way if you've had to go through that journey. I think he's a much more sympathetic character in some ways, and I think, again, something that isn't really explored much, certainly in the books that I've come across that I've narrated, that sort of journey.
Yeah, he does have a very interesting journey through the book from where he starts to certainly where he ends, and it's one of those things, like, there's so many things going on here because there is the romance, and there's Dog's story, and there's Lionel's story away from Dog, and then there's the baseball team. And what was your process for threading all this together and giving everything kind of the right balance?
That's an interesting question. When it reminds me of when I was I went to film school at UCLA at screenwriting, and one of my instructors said, you have to learn all the rules and then you have to forget them. And at this point, I don't really think about that stuff very much. I mean, I do, but I don't, I mean, it's just like, it's become very intuitive, weaving all of that together and kind of knowing when the mix is right. I do rely a lot on my training in screenwriting because it's a great education in story, and weaving it all together is just, that's the job.
do you that's very true. Are you somebody who does the elaborate outlines and does the elaborate plotting, or is it I'm starting here and I'm going to end here and I just fill it in as I go?
I don't have the patience to that. I do a little writing for Screenwriting U magazine, and I just wrote an article on how to write fast. And I do recommend that people outline, but unless someone's paying you, don't get too involved with it because nobody's going to see it. So what I do is I start to outline, and then I get impatient and I start to write. So I have this incredibly half-assed, incomplete outline when I start. And then I get to a certain point in the book and it's like, okay, I need to stop again and I need to outline the next section so I know where I'm going. But, you know, it's kind of, it becomes very intuitive after a while. I mean, I think I've got 17 books out. So you get very used to doing it and thinking about it. And it's interesting, you know, sometimes you'll hear writers talk about, well, the character told me to do this. And I don't really think of things in those terms, but you're building a story, you know, you're constructing something. So when you've started in a direction, you have to continue in that way. And so whatever you've built before, you either have to build on it or go back and change it. Mm-hmm. So does that answer your question?
I think it did, yeah. How did you two come together for the audio version? Was it as simple as it turned up at ACX one day and you auditioned for it, Joel, or was it a little more...
It was Haley.
It was
Bizarrely
Haley.
enough,
Right.
It was Haley, right?
Well, actually, I did not put this book up on ACX because, you know, it's my 8th audiobook, and so I knew the kinds of auditions I'd get, and I just had this cringing thought about all these people sending in terrible Lionels. And I was listening to Haley's book, the second Skylar Fox book. And that's when I heard Joel, and it's like, I immediately thought, oh, well, he can handle all these voices, and, you know, it doesn't sound inauthentic, as so many of the narrators on ACX would in this case. And so I contacted Haley, who I'd met several times when I lived out in California, and then I contacted Joel through her.
It was funny because when he contacted me, I was in New York at the time for a big audiobook convention that they have, and I was already overbooked. And he contacted me, and I was like, ugh, not sure I can do this. And I was like, and we went, and anyway, we were in New York, and I was in the hotel room, and I think I read like 4 pages of it, and I was like, oh shit, I have to do this. There is no possible way I cannot do this. And Rich was so mad at me because he controls my schedule, and it's just, I'm like I always am like, can you just spend the space-time continuum to find me another 4 days to do? So, but I just loved it so much straight away, and I had to do it, and it was, and I was so thrilled to be asked. It was interesting because he kind of, clearly in Skylar, there's a character called Jamie who's rather flamboyant. And one challenge I had once Marshall came to me via that route was I really worked hard to make sure they weren't the same person. I didn't want them to have the same voice. So that was fun. But again, like, duo first person, that is audiobook. That's tough. It's hard when you've got 2 male voices back and forth and you're not using 2 different narrators, you know?
So as you were trying not to sound like Jamie, and I could tell you, having heard both of the books, you're nothing like Jamie when you're Lionel. How did you find Dog's voice and then the nuances with Lionel to make him not Jamie?
Lionel is much more... I think Lionel is less of a kid than Jamie is. I think Jamie is kind of inside a 6-year-old. And I think Lionel has a lot more survival kind of... Jaded's the wrong word, but I think there's a lot more bite to Lionel just as a survivor. And And so that helped. And then, you know, I knew once I found the sort of range for Lionel and what that rate of speed was, and that he was a quick thinker and stuff like that, that I needed to kind of find something that would, with my own voice, still, you know, Lionel is a little bit kind of like me on like 12 Red Bull.
I don't know that I want to see you on 12 Red Bulls.
No.
Just to say.
It's so funny. I don't drink, and I'm one of those people that people are like, good. Dog, I knew I had to go to a lower place vocally. I knew that it would be useful to make him a slightly slower rate of speaking. And he's kind of he's not dumb, but he does dumb things. I think he's more, his brain works less quickly than Lionel's does. And something about his nickname, this is so silly, but I was thinking of the dog in Up, the one that's like, hello, squirrel. And something about, and its name is Doug in the Up, his name is Doug, which I realized like, but something like about kind of like sort of a puppy that was too big for itself, that kind of had giant feet and big floppy ears and didn't quite know. I think in animals a lot. And so, yeah, it was just like, I think the first thing that came to mind was kind of like, oh crap. And like his entire voice came out of, oh crap, you know, because that's basically what happens to him over and over and over again. So yeah, it was fun. And
you
what's so
interrupt the interesting thing about listening to you talk about is that a lot of those things are things you do when you're closeted, lowering your voice, not wanting to seem too smart because that will draw attention to you. You know, so those are all choices that people make about how they present themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
What was it like for you, Marshall, to hear this come to life? Because, of course, you get, like, the initial chapters and stuff to hear how Joel's doing and if it works for you, and then it goes from there.
I have to answer that for him first. Because he was amazing to me. Because when he contacted me, he said, I don't normally like audiobooks that are, you know, acted or performed. He doesn't like listening to a movie, which anybody who's listened to any of my stuff knows that's exactly what I do. Mm-hmm. Marshall, as a listener, prefers what we kind of call a dead read, which is where the narrator sort of doesn't get in the driver's seat and the narrator is merely a verbal conduit that allows that doesn't, he's not painting with colors. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You let the listener do all the work. But Marshall very cleverly and very generously, knowing that it was dual first person, and therefore knowing that in order for these two very disparate voices to exist, they couldn't just be read in the same voice. He literally just walked away because I'm answering his question. He just left. But he said to me, I'm probably not going to necessarily like it personally, but I know it's what it needs to be, and I'm going to trust you. And that was amazing. Like, that was amazing. So it really meant a lot. So now he can say that he hated it, but I've explained why he hates it, and that's fine.
No. I just dumped a glass of water all over everything. And with nothing to do with what you were saying. You're just clumsy.
I made him wet.
Now, you know, I'm thrilled with the result. I knew choosing Joel that people would really like it. And, you know, I used to be in theater, and I know that what's in your head seldom happens for a writer. And I didn't even want to try to get that. And I don't even know if that would have been a good decision in this case to try to do that. So, I mean, I'm really happy with the results.
Did it change your perception at all of modern day performed audiobooks, or is Joel the exception to the rule?
You have to, part of the reason that I have those opinions, I think, is that not all narrators can do voices, and sometimes it's better to steer them toward simply doing a good storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, unless you have a kind of jack of all trades, you're not going to get a good result. And I have had experiences where narrators would send me, his characters, and I'm like, no, let's not do voices.
How's the reaction been between a romance reader who's, let's say, pick up any of Joel's audiobook titles because they like what he does and they like the genre he's working in, versus somebody who may come into this book without being a regular reader inside the genre?
I think that, people identify a lot, I think, with Lionel in various ways. One of the speeches that's in there, I think, is about being an outsider and how everybody's an outsider at some point, and people really seem to connect with that. And I think, depending on how much experience a reader has had with that, that really can color their read. And certainly, sometimes romance readers really want to read about people they'd like to date. and those are not characters I'm particularly good at. Because I like characters who have a little bit of challenge to them, and conflict. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, if you think if you're trying to design characters that everybody will like and everybody will want to go out on a date with, that shaves off a lot of edges. It makes conflict very difficult. I have a lot of respect for the romance writers who manage to get those characters, that people love and still make, you still use high conflict. So
I had friends that do not read romance really at all as a genre that I was like, you have to read this book. Like, I had gay friends that I was like, this book will mean so much to you and it will touch you and it will stay with you. You have to read this. And I had I've had many of my sort of romance listeners love it too. And I think a great thing about it is I hope that in some ways it makes some of those romance listeners, gives them a little bridge to sort of look at other LGBT fiction that doesn't necessarily, fall under pure romance, like Simon and the Homo Sapien Agenda, which is one of my favorite books like ever. And, but that's not ever going to show up in like an Audible romance search engine. So I think that's really, really cool. And I think what's funny is there's been reviews that have like the headline of the review was like, I want to marry dog. And there's been those people that are like, I want to shoot dog. So, which I think is the mark of a great character. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's if the character is a cardboard cutout, all black and white, then that's not nearly as interesting as like, we're all not the perfect puzzle piece. You just need to, and I just loved it. And like really anybody that I think that what really resonated, this happens, like this horrible like way that we treat each other and the kind of like judgments that we make about one another within our own community, where you kind of feel like we should sort of like all be on the same side and look after each other and be supportive, like, there's a website called Douchebags of Grindr that you can go on to and like look at, but it's like, this is the way people are. It's like, oh, I'm straight looking for other straight guys. No, you're not. No, you're not. But but like it's very interesting, and like, you know, people do the same thing with African Americans and with Asians and but this weird thing of like people who are comfortable enough to celebrate actually like their gayness really can frighten people, and that's very, it's such an interesting thing about us, and I think it's important, and it certainly makes you think about yourself and like how you adjust yourself when you do anything, you know, what kind of masks we wear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, we don't think about that very much. You know, I mean, gay people, particularly gay men, do a lot of code shifting, and it's so unconscious. You know, it's like in different situations you behave differently, and you see it sometimes in other groups more easily. You know, but it's definitely there.
Do we get to see any more collaborations between you two, perhaps, at some point down the line?
I hope so.
Maybe, yeah. I slipped Joel a book. We haven't talked about it, but I have slipped him something.
And Joel looks confused, for those who are just on the audio.
Literally, I'm not allowed. I'm not allowed to look at things. Oh my God. Okay, I have to go back now and look at it again. I'm so excited. Yay.
Well, and you're going to be asking soon what we're up to. I have a new mystery series, which I've slipped to Joel.
Yay!
Which is lighter than the Boys Town books. And, it's a little more like a cozy. It's set in the 90s in a video store.
Oh, I saw the cover for this on your website. The book came out like in July, right?
No, actually the book came out September 15th.
Maybe the blog post was delayed in July.
You know, I think I think the
you might have cover revealed, and maybe that's what I saw. Yeah.
And there was a pre-sale for 2 months, so.
Tell us a little bit about that, because this will be coming out October 2nd, so that'll be out for people to go pick up.
You know, it's both of my mystery series take place in places that I used to live. For the Boys Town books, I lived in Chicago in the 80s and use a lot of my memories for that. And this is set in Silver Lake in California, where I lived in the early 90s. And so I gave my character a video store, which is actually really fun to work with as a mystery writer, because he has access to a lot of information about people.
Indeed. I used to work at a video store, and yes, we do know a lot.
Well, I may need to send you some questions. But it's a cozy, so it's an amateur mystery kind of thing. And then this book, the first book, starts on the second day of the LA riots, which I remember very well, and I incorporated some of my memories of what that was like. And, you know.
Yeah.
So, and I'm already working on the second one of those. Which
cool.
will probably be out in January. And in the middle, there's a Boys Town books coming out for Christmas.
Oh, fantastic. Well, definitely link people up to Night Drop in the show notes so they can go pick that up. I love the cover. I'm like, that's a video store. I may have to read that. Video store in the 90s when I was doing it, too. So.
Okay, well, any corrections you have sent to me personally, don't put them in the review.
Oh, of course. Yeah, wouldn't do that at all. And how are you adding to your 100+ titles, Joel? What's coming down the pike for you in October and November?
I have been doing a tsunami of titles for N.R. Walker. They all kind of hit at once. I just had the third Red Dirt Heart come out for her, and then we have a book called Switched that's about to come out, and then another one that is so great. People that liked Femme will love this book because it's a similar kind of tone. It's called The Weight of It All. And it's amazing. I have my first Jordan Castillo Price book coming out that I'm crazy excited about. It's called Hemivore. It's a vampire book. It's awesome. And another one that should be coming out really soon that meant a lot to me. I campaigned for this book. It's the first YA. It's is it Harmony Inc? Is that what the Dream Spinner? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's their first YA title that they're putting out on audio.
Oh, fantastic.
And I went to Elizabeth and I was like, please, 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 we need to get these stories out there. You know, they're really important for people to have access to. And I love this story. Can I do it? And she said yes, which was so awesome. And it's called Mad About the Hatter. It's Alice's brother ends up in a tryst with the Mad Hatter, and it's adorable and wonderful. And I get to play all the characters in Alice in Wonderland. And it's written by Dakota Chase, who is also Kiernan Kelly, sort of. It's also Kiernan Kelly, but it's brilliant, and it really was a treat. I think it's one of the best things I've ever done, just in terms of performance stuff. So I'm excited about that.
Fantastic. That's a good agenda that you both have coming up. And what's the best way for our listeners to keep up with you guys online? I'll let Marshall go first, because I realize I left you both going, who, me? Me. I don't know.
Actually, if they go to Insta Freebie, they can get a free story, a free prequel to the Boys Town books, and that signs them up for my newsletter.
Fantastic.
And Facebook is probably the best way for me. Twitter is Joel Leslie Fro, Fro. But Facebook is Joel Leslie Frumpkin, and I'm constantly posting on there and about whatever's coming out and reviews and stuff like that. So that's a really good way to stay in touch.
All right, fantastic. We'll link up to all those things, plus the books we talked about. And thank you both for coming on and talking about this wonderful book, Femme.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So thanks again to Marshall and Joel for stopping by and talking to us about Femme, and as well as giving us a sneak peek into what they are working on currently and what's coming out in the next month or so.
Exactly. I think that'll do it for this week's episode. Coming up in episode 105, Megan Maslow will be here as part of the 2017 GRL blog tour. Plus, Danny from Love Bites Reviews will tell us about what she's been reading lately.
Awesome. Those have been really fun interviews to do.
Exactly. So guys, remember, no matter where life takes you, the journey will always be sweeter if you have a book. Until next time, guys, keep turning those pages and keep reading.
For detailed show notes and the complete episode backlist, go to biggayfictionpodcast.com. New episodes are available every Monday on all major podcast distributors and YouTube. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.